Good evening, boys and girls. Thank you so much for being with us again. We are at now the second season of Passion Dialogue number 3. Today we are going to have a very special guest with us. Before I go to that, I would like to thank you for the ones that who are the first times joining our Passion Dialogue and supporting our course. For the first timer, ZaZaZu, we are a discrete e-commerce ecosystem to guide women to explore, experiment, and enhance our sexual and intimacy journey through sexual education, consultation, and curation of products based on your individual needs. Why we have started this company is that we really aim to normalize sexual wellness for every woman in daily life, like our daughter generation, our generation, hopefully our mom generation as well. And really to create a safe space for women to explore, learn, and discover 360 around sexuality and intimacy. So today we have a very special guest, as said, Elizabeth. As you can see, we are one teenager year old apart. Today, the topic today is that how do the youth today see sexual wellness? We have experienced that we have in the meanwhile many audience. Most of them are 30 to 50, and every time when Cass and I we went to a talk or went to a pop-up store, went to an event, every time when we start to talk and we run a sexual wellness company, when we ease into the topic, mostly we realize that women in our age, our generation, are still a little bit hesitant. You need we were just at an event recently, and we're introducing changing business cards and saying, okay, what are you doing? Oh, we are running a sexual wellness company. I still remember the facial expression of that lady who is working in a rather conservative industry, taxation, and she's like, you can already see. So she's like, okay, can I please dig a hole and then just run through it? And then this is the moment we realize. Very often, most of our customers, we communicate through online. So we actually don't know necessarily their age, don't know what is behind. People are very open to talk about the topic. However, when we are in the face-to-face meeting, we see people in our generation are still quite reluctant and quite, I would say, hesitant when we approach this topic. Afterwards, we explain why sexual wellness is important, sexual health is important. Then suddenly, okay, they break a little bit the barriers. Say, okay, what do you offer? How can I talk to my kids about sexual education, so on and so forth. So it will be very interesting because a lot of our followers are actually people in your age. Oh, so how is so Elizabeth is 21-year-old young. Oh my God, so young. So how is we have also just recently a very interesting, social media manager who is 27. Who would love to join our company. We are hiring for everyone who is looking out there, a marketing manager, please reach out. And we actually assigned everything. She's excited about the company. And then next day she said, you know what, I'm so sorry, but my mom, I just told my mom that I'm going to join the company. And my mom, and I explained everything what you explained to me. My mom looked at me and said, there's a porn company now. And the girl was like, no. And then they explained, got in an argument. Mom was really upset. I raised you up. How can you join such a demonized industry? So eventually she couldn't fight her, so she dropped, unfortunately. So I would like to understand. I mean, she was if the mom wouldn't be there, she would have joined us. Yeah. What does sexual wellness, sexual well-being, it's a big topic, not just sex as such. Sexual wellness, sexual well-being mean in your generation?
I don't know if I can speak for my entire generation, but I feel like a lot of the times people just have the subconscious connotation that sexual wellness is equivalent to sex and then that's it. But I feel like for me, sexual wellness is how comfortable you feel in your body and how confident you are and how you express that. And that translates to like the relationships that you have in your life as well. Not just romantic relationships or sexual relationships, but also how you conduct yourself with your friends as well. Right. So I think sexual wellness encompasses more than just like the act of sex or like even masturbation, but it's more about how you grow into feeling more comfortable in your own skin. And I think discovering your body and how it works is a very vital part of that. Yeah, which I think people don't really get, that sexual wellness is more than just what it says, which is sex, you know.
Right.
Yeah. So I think I really identify with like your possible hire, like the marketing girl, because my mom she's very open, and we share a very great relationship in the sense where I can talk to her about a lot of things. But even like sex in itself is something that I wouldn't like to like talk to her about. I don't know why. I think it's just because I'm afraid like of like her, I'm not sure, judging me.
Being disappointed.
Yeah, because she's also a very open person, but I think I don't know. It's just I just feel a bit uncomfortable. I would talk to my friends. I would talk to like strangers about it, like willingly. But definitely.
I totally understand.
I think it's just my mom. Yeah, she's very chill, but maybe I will talk to her about it in the future sometime, because I know she's quite open. Like, I don't know if I can say this, but I found her sex toys before as well. Yeah, so I know that she's open to these kinds of things, but I guess I'm not ready for that intimate mother-daughter discussion about our sex lives, because it's something a bit different, I think.
I think this is nothing. We did a survey actually with across all generations, saying that roughly it's so 25 to 55. The oldest participant was 55, and we're saying, okay, who is the last person you want to have a conversation about sex with across all generations? My parents. Like, you know, and it's very interesting because actually I mean, and that's why it's we're conducting it in the future some workshops. We are also, through this survey, we actually made some questions saying, okay, why? It's like we always feel uncomfortable to talk about sex life, or I mean, but the thing is, like the one you just mentioned, you were even able to talk about sexual relationship with a stranger.
Yeah.
But we can't talk about it with our parents, and it's especially even not with the mom. So it's fine. So it's really kind of strange, and I think that is how also the industry has, because in the society the topic is such demonized topic. It's very, very prevalent. Sometimes if you go to Orchard, for example, you go to the mainstream, and you see a lot of women, you know, major brands, Western brand, be it Asian brand, you see young girls actually dress up very sexy. Is it okay to be sexy, but we cannot talk about sex openly? That's actually a little bit sad, because we very often young people need guidance as well. And then the thing is that if you ask another young person, he would not necessarily, or she would not necessarily have the
equal inexperience trying to talk about it.
Who has the experience? Your mom, actually, your parents. But then we can't talk about them. And then I think generally we always talk with the same generation about the same issue. But the thing is, like, nobody actually knows better, so everybody is like explore, discover. I still remember when I was so when I was about to have, when I was 17, so I went to Germany when I was 16. And that was so I was about to be intimate with someone, but I had no clue how to do that. At that time, that was 2000, so there was no Google as such, so you couldn't
ask the internet.
Exactly. So I was asking my friends at that. I was in language school, and there was one girl. She's 2 years older, and she said, "You have to do this. You have to put your leg like this." And then I was like, we were lying down. We're lying down on the floor, and then do this. That's why it hurt less, because it's this position, and so on. So ultimately, I didn't do it because I was so scared. Because the information is, at the end of the day, there's 3 girls. One has less experience than the other. Nobody has any experience. It's rather hearsay. She heard from someone, and okay, ultimately, none of us did it. And then, and then the thing is, like, once you experience your first time, if you haven't somehow explored your body yet, I think it's very easy for women to get hurt. It's I don't know how it's this generation, but at my generation, we have done this interview with this people who has participated in our survey, sexual intimate survey, and saying most women, not most women, without any exception, the first time was painful. And then if you ask them why, okay, the fact that it was it's intrusive, and he didn't know what he was doing, she didn't know what she was doing. But most of them are saying, if I would know my body better, if I would have explored a little bit more, I think it would be less intrusive, because I would know what is
what feels good.
What feels good, and I could also guide the person, because most of them the first time still with even some of them with the real partner, with the future husband, I would have guided them better to discover me. Because it's not only for women, I think for young men your generation, then let us also know what are their references now? Is it still, where do they get, for example?
I feel like people usually get their references from like online sources, especially if their friends aren't very experienced as well. Yeah, but the problem with that is like, I think, so example, most of them look at porn as a reference, but it's a very unrealistic kind of like expectation, both for women and men. And aside from that, like the only other kinds of sources we get are maybe like sex education in school, but even then it's very limited, or it impresses a certain kind of mold on people on how sex should be or how sex shouldn't be. And because most of the time they advocate for abstinence anyway. So for me, I feel like the most effective way in which I've learned about sex and more about myself as well is really through like self-exploration. But more importantly is talking to friends. Because I think that's like the most important like way we can receive information and we don't feel judged. So I think a big part of the reason why we don't want to talk to our parents about it is because we fear the judgment for sure. Yeah, and like talking to someone who's actually experienced it before is so valuable because they can tell you what works and what doesn't work. But at the same time, I think it's also, you can have this framework in mind, but more importantly, you have to discover it for yourself. So you have to practice, or like you have to be with a partner consistently before I think you both realize and communicate effectively what works. So I think what you said earlier about how it's very painful for a woman during their first time, it's also because I feel like they're not sure what they're going into actually. And more than that, not just for the first time, but I think even subsequent times, they can't take charge of their pleasure. Like sex is very like male-centered and male-focused, and a lot of the times, in my opinion. So it's like after the guy comes, then it's like okay, then that's it. It's over. It's like oh my goodness, And I think it's also partially like not just because like men in themselves aren't really educated about it, but women in themselves are also afraid to take ownership and take charge and be like, okay, I mean you're done, but also what about me? You know, or because they don't even know how to articulate like what feels good or what they want. So how can they expect the guy to know what they want if they themselves don't know what they want?
It's exactly our narrative. No, it's a very valid, especially when you are young. And I think because the society, I mean, we as society are telling women now, you know, you own your job title. You know, you can be in the boardroom. You can be. I think, fairly speaking, I think we live in a generation in the society now. Women have never been entitled to have more. Now we are really, if you want to be anything, you can be a CEO as well. I mean, like ages ago, you simply can't. Or, I mean, I come from China originally, and there was still a long time ago, in the communist 50s, post-war, it was in the time where, actually my parents' generation, the Communist Party is going to tell you who you marry. You cannot just marry someone. So the Communist Party need to see, okay, this is your family background is okay, farmer considered as good background versus capitalist, you are owner of business, considered as bad background. This is in China at that time. And so at that time, if you match them together, they say, okay, similar background need to, so we call that, what is it? So need to match in a way. So in this way, that it's less about love, it's rather about somehow practicality and so on. So and then if you grow up like that, this is how, for example, my parents were matched in a way. Indian, I mean, still now I mean Netflix and make a big fun out of it with Indian matchmaking, but it is still true. So if you match two people. But the thing is that once you get matched, then you become intimate. Women don't think that they are entitled to have it because they never really explored it. And they very often couldn't tell, even because it's supposed to be the first time, right? So it's the first time they couldn't actually tell that I like this way. Then the husband would then in that case ask, how do you know that you like it this way? So I think a lot of cultural impact has negatively somehow impacted for women to have and to entitled to have pleasure. But however, in this generation, even I think in my generation, very often we did some consultation session with some clients to facilitate the conversation. We are saying, you know, if you just, she says, I like this way, but I never tell my husband. But now it's like 10 years later, I always tell, let me tell him next time, let me tell him next time. But time just passed by, 10 years later, I never told him. he is doing the whole thing that I don't like.
Yeah.
And now it's too late to tell because he would ask, why didn't you tell? So then we actually, went through saying, okay, because the baby was just born 3 months ago. And we said, you know what, now my body has changed, just let's leverage that narrative and say, I actually like this. And the husband, astonishingly, she was very, to her surprise as well, he was like, great, it was very tiring for me to do that thing. And I didn't know, I always thought this was the way, through porn, through many other sources which are not relevant. So would you actually encourage your friends to come to you and say, first time, or even not the first time, would you actually encourage them to explore, or to, for example, if I am girlfriend, not 20-year-old, saying, I'm falling in love with this boy, he really want to do it, I'm not sure whether I want to do it, I'm still very scared because it's the first time, and virginity, hymen, this is still a little bit of a thing. What would you give a recommendation?
I feel like actually I have been having this conversation quite often with my friends. I think especially at this age, like where people are getting into serious relationships for the first time and everyone's like kind of unsure about what to do. So it's not just girls actually, but guys as well. So I actually have a guy friend who he and his girlfriend have been waiting to do it for quite a while, but I think they're still kind of unsure about how really to approach it. And the advice that me and my other friends gave him is that I think communication is key above everything, especially when you already have that established relationship and a bond. So it's not like a one-night stand or like a casual relationship. Like you shouldn't feel uncomfortable to voice like how you're feeling and your opinions at any point in time, like throughout the process. And I think that plus they shouldn't be afraid to use if they need extra help, meaning like using lube or like sex toys. I think maybe sex toys might be a bit daunting for the first time, but my guy friend was actually, so a group of us were hanging out, so the guy friend advised this guy that you should really invest in lube, because I think that's a big thing that people think that they can do without, but it really helps a lot, because like I found out recently that your body state of arousal doesn't necessarily correlate with like how you're feeling emotionally or mentally. And it really helps the process, especially if it's like the first time. Not just the first time, but any time you have sex. But I think, so we were advising him that for her comfort and pleasure for sure, like you should take it slow, you should communicate and tell her, like ask her how she's feeling at any point in time, and then also use lube. So we are all rooting for him, honestly, like but like we're like, when because he's been having this concept for a very long time.
It's great because you have this conversation. I think that I think my generation, I think every generation talk more. The next generation by generation, you will talk more about it. It's great that you have this community actually to encourage each other to do it or not to do it, to do it safely, for example. And then I think the key thing is communication is key. Very often we see across all ages now, people don't have intimate relationship anymore. Not only sexually, but also just mentally, emotionally. It's because the conversation is not ongoing. And today you can still have, this kind of easy communication because it's the first time, everything is fresh, and you don't have to, in our age, you're concerned about different things now. Okay, the breast is not there where they're supposed to be after breastfeeding, and then the belly looked differently, and then when we were young, everything was, different kind of concerns. But actually, still at this age, we still need to talk to our girlfriends about But there are other concerns somehow in life. Where I was talking to my boy, one of my girlfriends saying, after the breastfeeding, when my boy was born, and then everything, once after 9 months he's done, you can actually put your breast just behind because it's so saggy, and she's like, because I felt really bad. He was like, what's new about that? Every woman's like that. You should just go to the gym and then go to the shower, and then everything, your thing is cold. Once you took out the bra, it's like, it actually gives you comfort. I was actually quite relieved afterwards.
It's very normal, right?
It's very normal.
Not just you, It's
not just you, but things even you somehow know, but you actually don't know. So conversation is actually really great. But I like the way you say it was the lubricants, because there's a big misconception. Sex toy is one thing. Big misconception about lubricants, because most of the people say, why do you need lubricants? Because it accelerates the smoothness, right? And as you said, very often people say, okay, the men often question the woman, saying,
why do you wear
now? Sometimes it has nothing to do with emotion, nothing to do with body is really just rather
just physical,
It's just someone, for one of my friends is always too wet. She's like, yeah, I don't need lubricant, it's just too wet. It's like I have to change sheet all the time. Because we're so different. And there's the other ones like, I drink water, I drink aloe vera apparently is going to enhance lubricant, and then there are some Chinese yen apparently is also enhancing inside circulation and so on. But still, I'm eating everything, drinking everything, just gonna happen. And then so they finally decided to use lubricant, and she was like, in the night, she's like, life just changed. What was I thinking before? Because both of them, I mean, in my age, I was like, lubricants is like only if you need it, and if you
something's wrong,
something's wrong, she can't get you high, and you are like kind of cold, so that's like, it's just wrong, really misconception. Lubricant, great advice, especially for young people. When you are the first time, how do you know that? So, and then what our audience don't know, Elizabeth is actually a sociology student. I'm very bad in this word. I have practiced this word very much before, so it's sociology, right? Sociology? No. Sociology. Something with social. So, and then actually you can observe the whole thing in a bigger context. How is it, what motivates you actually to study that?
I think, for me, I feel like I wanted to study sociology because there's a lot of value in like human relationships and how it works in the bigger scheme of things. So not just like the example, the individual relationship that you and I may have, but like how everything contributes to larger like human behavior. So I think in terms of like sexual wellness, like I would love if Singapore society especially could be more open about like talking about sex, because I mean we have sexual education in school, but it's very limited. Like so, for me, when I was back in primary school and secondary school, a lot of the times they would just start to practice the ABCs, which is like abstinence, be faithful, and like condom, which I think is such a limited like view of what sex and sexual wellness really is about. So actually, there's a really good Netflix show called Sex Education. I think you've heard of it, right? And that's what it should be like. Like, you should have someone that you are able to talk to like freely and openly, and most of the time it's like a peer. And that's how you learn about like sex in a more wholesome way. And I think that because for me, like I've thought about this a lot, and the reason why like Singapore society is the way it is, which is kind of what's the word, like close-minded, I would say, is also in like partially because of the way our society is in general. So like the Singapore case, so for example, like people don't really move out of their houses until they're much older, and so the lack of private spaces contributes to the lack of being able to explore like their sexual wellness and like intimacy in general. So not just with themselves but also with their partners. And because the government doesn't actively encourage this kind of openness, I think it leads to people having a very closed mindset towards sex in general. So it also affects our relationships, like we've talked about just now. So when you're not able to communicate efficiently and openly about even these intimate things with your partner, let alone like other things in life, because if it's something that is like so personal and close to you, and you don't feel comfortable sharing it, then there are so many other facets of your life where you wouldn't feel comfortable talking about it, which kind of makes our quality of life quite low when you think about it.
I think that, like you said, the conversation, you need to have a conversation starter. It's rather emotionally, physically. If you don't, I think people who have great conversation, like for example, my husband and I, he always used to say, I want to marry my best friend. In a way, it sounds really weird, cheeky, but it's like, because with your best friend, you can talk about everything. And I think every time when we encounter or good friends of us, and then every successful couple I know, really successful, it's not just for the sake of staying together, really successful ones, are really because they have great conversation. They break barrier to talk about things that are taboo to talk about.
Uncomfortable to talk about.
The things, but it's very easy to say. The things like, because the education, especially in Singapore, I feel very much because I lived in I grew up in China, left China when I was 16, go to Germany, lived there for 16 years, and then came to Singapore. So I always thought, so my impression of Singapore was still back in when I was a 16-year-old kid in China. That was 2000. At that time, Southeast ASEAN, like Malaysia and especially Singapore, was somehow a dream for us. So everybody, the good Chinese went to Singapore. You know? The one we are left alone in China anyway. So we have for Singapore, for me, has always been a very aspirational country, and look what you have all achieved. And the people must be very open-minded. So I actually made an assumption. This is where we actually started my business with my business partner, Cass, who's Singaporean as well. And we said that, oh my God, this is where we were pitching to our investors, saying, our country roadmap, Singapore, the first place to be. You know, you have Eurasia, you have modern Singaporean Chinese, you have the Indian, and you have Malay. It's actually a great society to start a business like that. Later on, we realized when we do some researches in Vietnam, for example, communist country, in a way, you compared to China, compared to Bangkok, we realized actually Singapore is very, very close-minded. The conversation, when we have the conversation with people might be shy in Vietnam, but they still say, let's still talk about it. They will be intrigued. Whereas in Singapore, we did some researches, and then when we approach some people and saying, you know, this is what we do, and we want to do some survey, people will really just turn away, but interestingly, the government is actually encouraging young generation to have kids. But the young generation, we know, like, okay, for the 10-year-old younger than myself, so 26, 27, when they just start to buy an HDB, that age, most of them, I know, they don't want to have children. Because they say, okay, what's the point? I'd rather have a dog, I'd rather have a pet, and then I don't even want to have that conversation ongoing. So what I don't understand is like a little bit, how is the Singapore, do you guys go to school? Because on the one hand side, Singapore is saying, okay, once you graduate, have kids, please, immediately. But on the other hand, you are not actually encouraging conversation, whether it's intimacy, whether it's, is there anything link government, school, in higher education? Do you guys have different education there? How do you feel the mismatch somehow? You have to make an appeal to the government. What would you say?
I think the mismatch is because the government wants us to have kids, obviously for like the population and for the economy, and because it's driven by like economic goals. That's the reason why there's like an inherent mismatch with like societal like attitudes and values. So they push for this like for the sake of the economy, so they're giving us money, like baby bonuses and everything, but they don't actively encourage like discourse or like an openness like in society itself to talk about sex. So it's very weird to see like when I see advertisements on the MRT where it's like a giant sperm or something. It's so strange, and it just makes the differences even more pronounced, you know. I think in university, I would say the education isn't like a formal education, but it's more like meeting more like-minded people, or people who are willing to talk about things. And I think previously you were mentioning like normalization of talking about sex and sexual wellness, and you're saying that it matters most that people actually talk about it, because everyone wants to normalize this and normalize that, but no one's actually willing to have the first conversation. And I think that even for myself, I don't like openly like talk about it, like share on my Instagram story or whatever, because I think not everyone will appreciate having it like forced down your throat. It's more like having the option and knowing that someone is there and able to talk to you about it, especially when you're fumbling around and you're not sure about what's going on. I think there's also no need. I think that there was never also our mandate or generally sexual wellness. It's still private. This is something that, as you rightfully said, it's rather have an option to talk to someone, like the sexual education in Netflix, as you mentioned. Something that we are considering, we are approaching meanwhile some higher education, because we got to know young people like you. We were doing some interviews. Very often you get the biology class in school somehow, like you said, MRT, the sperm, the egg, the baby. Okay, what happened in between? No, this part is not elaborated. Okay, but then you go to, for example, when you go to higher education, how to be intimate. So you understand the biology, and then nobody is actually telling you how to build a fruitful relationship. What is, for example, intimacy, love, and yet, as I said, like our generation or the generation previously, it's rather okay.
you have HDV, you have a car, you have this. Unfortunately, this is you have certain kind of society pressure as well.
Yeah.
In your generation, I feel that people care less. It's rather okay. It's like, I like you, you like me, we are all similar mindset. And what is the, let's say, how do you perceive love, intimacy, relationship? Is this something that gel well together? Can they be loosely?
Love, intimacy, and relationships. I think that you can have, it's just different kinds of intimacies. Like you can have physical intimacy without the emotional intimacy and all that. But I think emotional intimacy is something very special and very important that you want to cultivate. And that's where love comes into play. I can't really say because I don't know what love is. Like, I have never been in love before. But I do know what it's like when it comes to like my friendships or like my family. So I have an idea of what love is. And I think emotional intimacy is one of the most important things that anyone can have. And I genuinely believe that that's what it's like. That's the essence of what it is to be human, which is the kinds of connections that we can have with other people. So physical intimacy is an important aspect of our lives for sure, because I think it's a very innately human thing to desire and to want to explore our bodies and other people. But at the end of the day, I think when it all comes together, that's when physical intimacy will feel even better than just the act of like, sex in itself.
I think that's I think this is something that our generation didn't get the education to, in the sense of like you have the emotional intimacy and the physical one. The physical one somehow for our generation is still a little bit. You have to do it for the sake of doing it. You do it for the creation of next generation. I think that the pleasure, this is something that we really aim to build. That you can have both. I mean, it's like it's maybe a too romantic kind of thing. If you are emotionally intimate, then you become physically intimate. You have a great conversation. You make love, in fact, and then you have a beautiful baby outside. It's like it's somehow a little bit.
It sounds very fairy tale, right?
It sounds very fairy tale. So in the reality for us, it's like, okay, you match, you somehow have to, the grandma, if your parents are not pressuring you, your grandparents already say, okay, when is baby coming? Do you want me to be dead before the baby will come? All these things will come, and then you have actually give a lot of pressure to the next generation who didn't actually understand yet how to translate emotional intimacy into physical intimacy. So very often in my generation, these two things are hard. Exactly. And then I think that in your generation, I feel like the conversation is going more and more. And then if you can talk more about, we say that the taboo topic, the best thing to break taboo is to talk about it, and then to normalize all these kind of things. If you would have one wish, for example, for the higher education, because I've emphasized a lot in the higher education, because this is the part we were designing some curriculum, working with some private school in the K-12 space. The biggest concern the parents always have is that if they understand, they will do it earlier. We always say they will do it either way. You just better let them do it in a more informed way. At least, and very often, if you get better education, they will actually postpone it. So the statistics are actually showing the more informed you are about sex, the more careful, the more reluctant you are actually also to explore the first step. So it's actually counterintuitive in a way. In the higher education though, this is where you actually really make friends. You are legitimately to be couple. If you say to your mom, I have a boyfriend now, I think it's legit. Whereas when you're 16 and say I have a boyfriend now,
like sure, how long will it last?
How long will it last? Where's that going? Seriously. So if you have, but then there is no place to learn. If there would be one thing that in the higher education, what would it be? Would you wish that there is some more from government side or from university side to teach more into the intimacy space? Why is it important? Mental intimacy, emotional intimacy, physical intimacy. Is there something that if you would, I mean, you are about to graduate already.
I feel like the thing about it being a formal education is that there's a tendency for people, I think especially when you're younger, to be like, oh, this is so awkward, like it's so weird, so weird for like some 30-year-old person to like come and tell us. But I think first and foremost, regardless of whichever education level you're targeting, I think it's important to educate them on safe sex. Like how to have safe sex and like what a condom is, how to put on a condom and stuff like this. Because I think that's something that they didn't really teach us when I was back in primary and secondary school. Yeah, but more than that, I think I was just having this conversation with a friend yesterday actually about what we would want to see in education spaces, and it's actually to educate us on like what goes, like how to forge deeper emotional like connections and better relationships. Because like I said before, sexual wellness isn't just about sex and everything. It's more about like the kinds of relationships that you can have in the future. So she was sharing with me like there are different attachment types when it comes to relationships. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but I'm also not very well versed in it. But basically it's like how people react, or the kinds of categories you might be in when it comes to being in a relationship, in terms of like your emotional attachment styles to another person. So these kinds of things which I've never learned about before, and I only found out through the internet. Yeah, it's great. I feel like if people like were more cognizant of what actually goes on in themselves and in other people in a relationship, and then from there be able to talk about things, and then that's how you work problems out. I think a lot of our relationships will be so much better. And having the strong emotional connection is what I feel, especially in my generation, is what leads to having stronger physical relationships as well. Yeah.
That's so well said. I think that we are about to time again. That's like the perfect sentence to end this great conversation. Elizabeth, thank you so much for your openness. It was fantastic to have I think it's very, for me, always very, if I talk to, we interview a lot of people, who can be, sitting here with me and then really have a normal conversation, just as two, kind of like two girlfriends with one teenager. When you said some 30-year-olds just to tell you about sexual behavior, I was like, okay, I don't want to have a top 21-year-old tell me how that works. I think actually generation can learn a lot from each other. I think that to have this great conversation openly and then to know view of your generation, I think you represent a lot of people. If our audience would hear it, and then you talk actually a lot of things out of the heart of people that we don't normally, people don't have a stage to, at least for now. And then sometimes you're celebrity talking, but they're like so far away. You want to hear real people talking about real things in life. So thank you so much again for coming here, and everyone else, and follow us, ZaZaZu /VIP, not /VIP, what was our underscore VIP. This is how conversation goes, and have a good day, have a good evening, and see you next time. Bye.